All right, good afternoon. You're still talking, which is fabulous. It means you haven't ran out of energy. So good. Well, I hope that you enjoyed your deep dive conversations and the side conversations that have been happening and connections that you're making. It's clear that as we follow the discussions today, we've not just unearthed new models, but we've unearthed a whole host of questions that are of what's possible, what the challenges might be. And so we wanted to close out the day with a panel talking about, again, what is possible? What are some neat things that are taking place? And how can we start to figure out how we chart a course forward? So in order to lead us through this conversation, Holly Zanville is going to be leading our panel here and our panelists. So please feel free to come up onto the stage. And you're all mic'd, right? So you have microphones and are ready to go.
How many are there?
All right, so Holly, take it away.
Sure. I hope everybody's not as tired as I am. So we've been really looking forward to this, not just the ending, but that didn't sound right. I'm going to start over. We've been really looking forward to having the conversation about the future. You know, clearly the future is here. It was probably here maybe a year and a half ago, and you are all well along in developing a lot of these ideas and these tools and these prototypes. And I want to share with you something. About four or 5 years ago, we had a first conversation around the idea of a digital, portable student, a learner passport. And there was someone in this audience, but I won't name the person, who I called and I said, what do you think? Are we ready? Are college universities or other providers ready to even consider this idea? And this person said, no, college universities are going to need some time. We need to take some baby steps. We need to think about transcripts. We need to think about the wide variety of learning that we're hoping to capture. And we're probably not ready with technology, but ready particularly for college universities to move forward. So we went down the road of working with all the folks who are in here to explore what could be done to really get the new transcripts out there as a model to see what more could be done. And that's kind of where we're at, and the future is here now. The questions we have now is, how can we accelerate progress faster? What can we do to maybe take the word student out of, and maybe this is controversial, but take the word student out of the record and replace it with learner, because the next stage is likely going to be learners who are going to be acquiring their learning not only from colleges and universities, but from their workplaces and from other experiences, and they're going to carry it with them, and they're going to have multiple institutions. And the question is, should the college and universities continue to hold on to that and help them from wherever they manage to acquire learning, and or should this go to third-party land, where like maybe your health records, you're going to acquire that and carry that with you for the rest of your life. So that's one of the key questions. Are we ready even to explore that, or are we still going to work on the kind of models that you're hearing about here, and or should we be doing both? So just hold those ideas in your mind, and when we get to the end, because we're going to allow, I think, plenty of time for questions, and this is not going to be maybe so much questions you ask of the panel, although I'll encourage you to do that. But this will be, we want to hear from you. What questions do you have? And if you could put something about one thing you could do to chart the future in the next year and a half, what one thing do you think would help accelerate progress? So we're going to at some point have the mics, and we'll go around. And any of you who want to offer up your kind of best idea, you have a willing, ready audience, particularly in Lumina Foundation, who wants to hear these ideas, because I think we're going to be having lots of conversations about ways in which we might be able to be supportive, along with others that are really wanting to look over all of our shoulders into this conversation. So I'm going to start with the panel. We'll go in this order, and if you would kind of tell us what your day job is, but then how are you related particularly to the work about beyond transcripts? So we'll start with Tom.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Black, and I'm an Associate Vice Provost for Student and Academic Services and 40 years University Registrar. The work that I did to contribute to this project was to re-envision a digital credential. It was a certified certificate. The effort that we added to the record keeping credential building activity was to make that digital certificate self-contained and much more explicit as to what the learner has either acquired in terms of skills and cognitive abilities or mastered.
My name is Chris Jagers. I'm with Learning Machine. We're a technology company that for the last year has been collaborating with MIT to develop an open standard for notarizing official records on the global blockchain. I know that sounds futuristic, but the end goal is to give students their own official records in a way that they can hold and share directly with others and have them be trusted as authentic. And before there can be any products that do that, there needs to be a common standard that product makers can use. And so, you know, as been overhearing all the conversations here over the last 2 days, you know, having learners hold their transcripts, their co-curricular transcripts, and is very much part of it. And the comprehensive student record becomes not those things, but their entire lifetime of achievements that they're able to hold on their phone or wherever.
Steve Mintz. I'm from the University of Texas system. And over the last day and a half, I've heard 4 ideas mentioned about what a transcript might be. And I want to add a 5th to that. The first one is an extended transcript. That's the co-curricular transcript that includes non-academic experiences during the time that a student is at an individual institution. The second kind that I heard I'll call a developmental transcript. This is about the 21st century literacies, the broad, well-rounded education that a student should acquire during college, but sometimes doesn't. And this would be a kind of behavioral nudge to encourage students to develop those facets of a liberal education. A third would be a competency-based transcript, but here we heard very different ideas about what that might be. In some cases, those competencies are atomic and granular, but often they were very broad, like critical thinking skills. And we need to think through what we really do mean by competencies, and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure. And finally, we talked about the universal transcript. That is the idea of a transcript that includes all educational experiences, not at a single institution, but at all the institutions that students acquire education from, which could be academic institutions, but also non-academic institutions. And the purpose of that is, of course, to facilitate credit transfer. The one thing that we didn't talk about, which has been very important in my own thinking, is what we call a persistent progressive student profile. This is not a transcript, but it is a record of a student's learning, their strengths, their weaknesses, and their aspirations. And the purpose of this fine-grained tool is to personalize education, to personalize learning trajectories, to customize content, and to tailor pace to each student's needs. We're convinced that the future of education will be more personalized than in the past, and we need to create the infrastructure that can support that kind of education.
I'm Bob Sheets. I'm at George Washington Institute of Public Policy. My major job is basically with the Credential Transparency Initiative, now transitioning to Credential Engine, which is to create a credential registry, talking about how any credentialing organization asserts information about the credentials they offer. My other major work is on the employer side, and I deal mostly with talent sourcing strategies, talent management, and especially all the different tools that are used by employers now to source, manage, and now predict performance of their talent. And that's my other side. So when I came to this meeting, I was looking about how then all these two legs connect to the learner record. And I think the most important thing I've learned is we are no longer the only game in town in the credentialing business. And that many times what a learner has as a record would involve learning that involves workplace applications and learning, and actually information from all these different credentialing organizations outside the academy. And so that's what I would bring to this meeting today is, if we think about the employer side and also the post-traditional student, they're going to be bringing stuff into the academy on learning and credentialing that we need to learn how to deal with and integrate for them to make communication on their use of that, including employers.
I'm Linet. I'm the policy specialist at the Great Schools Partnership. We're a nonprofit based in Portland, Maine, and we work to make the education system more equitable, rigorous, and personalized for every student. Predominantly, we do that in the K-12 space. We're also the conveners of the New England Secondary School Consortium, which is a partnership between 5 of the New England state agencies, so Connecticut, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. We work together to we work with secondary schools collaboratively to increase college readiness of students. We work simultaneously in policy, practice, and public engagement. And we believe that students will increase their college readiness through proficiency-based learning, multiple pathways, so multiple opportunities to demonstrate their learning, and through student-centered accountability systems, both at the state and the district level. I came here because I fundamentally believe that our work will not be successful in the K-12 space, and the incredible work that I've heard so much about over the last 2 days will not be successful or possible unless we work together. During the opening session a couple of days ago, I heard really powerfully that higher ed is an engine for change, and I fundamentally believe that. And I think that higher ed is a lever to change policy, to change practice in the K-12 space, and I think there's pressure coming at the higher ed space from all sides right now, and that it's a pretty extraordinary opportunity to work together to really change reality for our students who will ultimately be our citizens.
So in terms of, stand up. So in terms of the future, we know that in some other nations, essentially a student record is started in the K-12 stage, and that the students are going to carry that same record with them as they acquire their competencies throughout their lifetime. So I'd like to ask you all to think about, to what extent the universities that you're associated with, if you are, and you're more on the K-12 side, to what extent are you seeing the alignment between, particularly the high schools and the colleges, universities, particularly around admissions? Are the college universities wanting to look at e-portfolios and a list of competencies that might be acquired during high school? So to what extent are you seeing changes in the future that are going to be maybe, I'll say led by, but certainly encouraged by developments in K-12? And Sarah, I'm going to start with you, and we'll come back this way.
Okay. So I think that those are sort of two separate questions. I would say we've heard a huge amount of willingness in our conversations, particularly with admissions folks at the higher ed level, to look at portfolios, to look at things like cross-curricular skills represented on a transcript, to look at competency or proficiency or mastery-based transcript, and to accept those things. And then I think the other piece is the piece about sort of a more extended record, a record that travels with you into higher ed, a portfolio that travels with you into higher ed. And we talk some in the K-12 space about personalized learning plans, so a personalized learning plan that travels with you into higher ed. And I think that is a little bit different. I think the response there is a little bit different. We really haven't heard much from folks who are taking those pieces, like a transcript, like a portfolio, and translating that into a higher ed experience, continuing to use it and build from it. I think it's a little bit different with the competencies or the proficiencies, because most institutions deal differently with sort of credits that were acquired in high school or experiences that were had in high school and how they translate or are reflected in the higher ed space. But I think that there's sort of parallel paths that are being developed in both spaces, and I hope that some of our technology partners here and some of the institutions that are here today will enable that second piece to happen where students are able to sort of keep building on their transcript and to continue to follow through with their personalized learning plan or a record of sort of the course that they hope their experiences take.
So Bob, when you sit in with employers, a lot of them I know are focused on high school students being to have the opportunity to particularly start some of the certification pathway programs. Are you hearing employers talking about document or verification that's occurring at the high school level as they move into colleges?
Yeah, I think I'm glad you were saying all that, but what I find at the high school level, they are engaging in a lot of industry certification work that is really sophisticated work, and they're also involved in a lot of their co-curricular activities like student organizations where they have competitions that are judged by employers, that employers have records about those things, and I would love to see the universities take the same wonderful stuff they're doing about the student experiences in the universities, but actually recognize the stuff coming in from high schools in the same way. And so we're assuming that all high school students just have some academic records. A lot of them are carrying certificates, certifications, demonstrated performances from national competitions that employers value, and that is not ingested in to the university systems that students can build on. And also, a lot of times the high schools, we're encouraging more people, students, to have work-based learning, and they have evidence of work-based learning that is, I think, would be recognized and supported by employers. I was hoping universities and colleges would bring that in to the student records and build on those in the same way they're doing for their own students that originate with them.
Are there conversations in Texas about this, Steve?
Well, I would like to suggest that we all change our vocabulary, talk less about majors and more about what I'm going to call verticals. These are pathways that can begin in high school or even in middle school that will help us to create the pipeline, widen the pipeline of students who are well prepared to succeed in college, especially in the critical areas of the future, STEM areas. Too many students hit brick walls during their freshman year, and it's not just that they drop out of a major, it's that they really suffer a life tragedy. And we can help prepare them better for their future by trying to connect the high school experience and the college experience much more intimately than in the past. We spent 100 years separating the high school from the college. We need to reverse that process. In my system, one of the 3 or 4 largest systems in the country, 51% of my students ever graduate. 49% of my students will leave with debt and nothing else. And that's just not acceptable. And we need to think through the pathways that will get those students to a promising outcome that may not be a degree. It may be a certification or some micro-credential, but they have to come away with something meaningful.
Chris, what are your thoughts about the
a software vendor for 10 years in the admissions space, we've seen wild swings in the trends, particularly in regard to portfolios. A lot of the discussion around e-portfolios here has begun in the college classroom, but we're seeing at the admissions level an explosion of interest in what students can do even at the high school level. So 10 years ago, we started the product Slide Room to accept creative arts portfolios. Then a few years ago, STEM fields started asking for projects, robotics, things that go alongside their claims of international math competitions and things like that. So you can see the videos and the software and their projects. And now this year, we've started to see an explosion of business schools wanting to actually see leadership in action, presentation skills, and all that. So there's clearly an interest both at the high end to differentiate among highly qualified applicants, but also at the low end to look for new dimensions of merit where they might not otherwise shine through traditional vectors. I think that that rise of interest in proof of skill goes side by side with the rise in interest in proof of education. How can we give them something that they can use anywhere and independently have it be trusted by everyone? And they go together. They're both important.
So, Tom, is Stanford seeing transcripts coming in from students at high schools where they're identifying competencies or other types of learning?
So I have two comments about this. There is a vendor, SaaS provider, that has developed a application system that includes a portfolio. It was commissioned by what is referred to as the Coalition of Universities. I think that's 90 different institutions. They're adopting it in series. Some started this fall. Stanford is one of the coalition institutions, and they'll be adopting it over time. So I would say, by virtue of commissioning and applying this particular service, there is interest in acquiring this kind of information. What's interesting about that, while that is true, that there's interest in developing this information and bringing it in, at least evaluating it for admissions purposes, on the other hand, I'm the one that receives these applicants once they're accepted. I don't have any place to put that information. Now, the registrars in this room will recognize that they are limited by their student information systems. And I have to say, they're not a very inspired group of vendors. And so this information, while as we all would agree is as important as it is, we're going to have to solve that problem. And it's not trivial. Usually the investment that the institutions have with their student information systems is massive. So this is going to be one of the bigger bottlenecks in moving this agenda forward.
And I would argue that it may not even be the school's job to build the comprehensive system that can certify everything even outside of the purview of the school, experiences outside of the school. I think students have to come in and earlier on receive official records that they can hold and build upon as they enter into secondary education and even beyond. That the solution can't be completely achieved by a new SIS. There's just too much to store. It's changing too rapidly. The student actually is important, not in terms of giving them value, but in actually making them part of the technical solution for storing these things.
So I want to explore, since this session is about what next, charting the future, maybe in the next year, year and a half, 2 years. So Chris, I want to start with you. You mentioned blockchain, and I didn't hear too much, at least in the sessions I went to, about blockchain.
No.
But a lot of us are still trying to understand what is blockchain. But so I wonder why is it so important that we must understand this?
Yeah, great question, and I'm not going to give everyone a computer science lesson here, but it's akin to asking, in 1996, what is the internet, and why is it important? Why do my kid
okay, this sounds really important.
my kid is doing something with an online billboard or something, but it seems strange, and then slowly it dawns on us that it's a fundamental new technology that changes everything. And I would argue that the global public blockchain is something as fundamental that over time is going to become part of our infrastructure that changes everything. And it's a secular shift that's coming. I think muddying the waters and impairing the ability to understand it is the fact that it is also possible to make private blockchains. It is possible to make different kinds of implementations of the data structure. A blockchain is just a data structure. It's essentially a ledger for storing transactions. And it can be implemented in many number of ways, which gives it different qualities. And I think it's it is a confusing landscape to get oriented to initially because there are so many different independent projects happening that are actually using different blockchains and private chains. But that's why we felt it was really important to establish an open standard with how to connect with the global open blockchain, the one that's big enough to be like the internet, and to utilize it as a secure chain of trust.
And do you think higher education, particularly around students or learners' records, are they a good place to start for blockchain, or are there other sectors like banking or other ones that you think are likely to take off faster before higher ed goes?
No, I think bankers are going to use private blockchains because they want to exercise control, and they don't care about immutability or them being tamper-proof. They actually want to be able to edit things. The Bitcoin blockchain really hasn't had a killer app until now. It's all been currency. But if you look at how it's structured, what it records, it's perfect for academic credentialing because it records who sent the thing, who received the thing, potentially how much, and some extra information. So it's literally just tracking the conference of value from one entity to another and being able to verify that it indeed happened and secure it in a data store that can't be tampered with, taken down, that is not owned by any company or government or institution. And so I think credentialing is actually the blockchain's first killer app.
And does that mean we're all going to have to agree on common language in order for that system to work?
What do you mean by that?
Common language around whatever gets verified. Are we
think
going to have to agree on common standards and language?
There's two sides to the coin. They're both important. Here we've been talking a lot about the policy side of the coin. Like, what do these words mean? How do we interpret them? Then there's the technical side of the coin. Like, can I use this digital certificate, whatever it is, everywhere? And can anyone verify it? And both sides are important. But they are, in a way, separate concerns.
I've been in various meetings with college university folks talking about credentialing as a sort of shorthand word for the array of credentials. And I have to say that it's often surprising when some of the higher ed folks will say, well, a degree, that's different from a credential. And so credentials may be certificates or certifications, but degrees are separate. And a lot of our thinking is that credentials are sort of an umbrella over an array of different kinds of credentials. So I'm curious to know from you all, how are we going to think about what we're putting on the transcripts or the more permanent student records around the learning, assuming that credentials are really important, particularly to employers, because it's a proxy for learning, and they may or may not be able to read the 100+ competencies, but they may know that they're looking for, they see 2 badges, an associate degree, and an industry certification, and that may be very, very valuable for the type of skills and knowledge that they're looking for. So can you comment on this? This is around the language issues, but how do we move forward to get some better understanding, knowing that you're all developing models using these words right now? So how do we get the Webster's Dictionary to sort of take hold around these terms, or will we? So Sarah, we'll start back down the, sorry.
How do we, I guess I understand the question to sort of be, how do we create a shared understanding of what these things mean? I think it's, for me it sort of comes back to how we operate as an organization, as a consortium, is sort of simultaneously around public engagement, and really that's around making sure that schools reflect what their communities would like them to reflect. But it's also engaging them in the process of change and in thinking through pieces. And then it's in policy and practice as well. And I think we're doing some really thoughtful work, and I've heard about it over these last 2 days in sort of the practice realm and a little bit of the policy realm from higher ed and what these mean for the policies in our institutions. But I haven't heard a lot about how we educate parents who are sending their students to these places, about these institutions, about what's on their students' transcript and what that means. And we've talked a little bit about how do we roll out these initiatives with students. And we haven't talked so much about how do we roll out these changes and these pieces with industry partners. And so I think it's going to take some creative thinking in terms of next steps as these different models hit the field. How do we increase the understanding from the public's perspective, both in terms of parents and students, from K-12's perspective in terms of what the array of higher ed offerings are and how they connect with those pieces, and from industry's perspective, certainly given the varied nature of these types of pieces. So I think it's going to be about messaging and education on a variety of scales.
Bob,
Yeah, I think our process, I think we've learned that if we try to impose a top-down solution to any sort of standardization of language, we end up getting massive resistance. And so I think the next thing is a bottom-up. And bottom-up is getting people to be more transparent in what they assert on the web with regard to learning outcomes. But we also encourage them to make assertions about connections to frameworks. Those frameworks are anything they want to refer to that says, my thing is the same as that. And I think over time then in the marketplace we get much more common language develop over time, but I think it's going to be based upon the marketplace to actually get where certain frameworks move up in terms of their utilization for improving common language over time. The second thing I'd like to emphasize is many times the biggest innovation I see on the employer side is going through a much more detailed performance analytics to validate the competency requirements of my jobs. And I think people are now saying we need to do our homework on it. We just can't assume some stuff, use some old language. We have to go through the performance analytics that says this is the top performers, what do they have, how can I specify those in a much more validated way. I would love to see people on the supply side, instead of validating predictors on program completion, which is very important, but the last mile is how do I know that my competency statements are of high quality means they're fit for intended use and they've been validated that this leads to success in performance in the workplace. So I think those are the two things I see are the mechanisms by which we get more common and more valid high quality language.
Steve?
We're living through a paradigm shift, and it's as dramatic as one that took place about 100 years ago when we got so many features of higher ed that we think of as timeless, like grades, or electives, or majors, or departments. And that is requiring us to rethink everything. For example, in terms of assessment, we're now thinking much more in terms of performance-based assessment. It seems logical, but it was not the way we assessed learning in the past. We need to fundamentally rethink the relationship between our majors and job market outcomes, and this is a huge paradigm shift. So we have to have a lot of conversations about this. We have to take all of our stakeholders and help them understand this fundamental shift that's taking place. And hopefully when we come to the end of the road, there'll be a growing consensus that learning in the 21st century is a lifelong process, that it's going to take place from multiple providers, that it's going to involve a whole host of credentials, not just degrees, and that that's normal, that's not an exception.
Chris, you want to add?
I just agree with all that. Yeah.
So regarding language, I would say that, yes, I agree with Steve. That it's a little bit messy right now. Faculty at many of our institutions are not even accustomed to describe what are the takeaways from the learning experience. And so just getting them to be more explicit about what they're doing is a really important step forward. And they're gradually doing that. I would say about 5 years ago at Stanford, the faculty could barely spit out the words learning outcomes. It was just that kind of ugly thought to them. But now we did a survey fairly recently and discovered that indeed the faculty were articulating outcomes. About half the faculty were articulating outcomes on their syllabi. So that's progress, and that was in 5 years. I don't know how much longer it's going to take to get the remainder, but these projects that we're working on, I think, are nudges in that direction. because we're saying that if you will describe what you're doing in this learning enterprise, we will capture it. And in my case, my effort is to then give that back to the student as a completion of the pedagogical loop. That's been my emphasis, not so much to have language for employers, but to have language for the learner in regard to what they have mastered. For me, that's job one, get the learner prepared to be able to articulate what they know, what they can do. And if so happens that language is compatible with employers, that would be, home run. Yeah.
If I can mention one thing to build on a couple of points is, what I'm finding is the low-hanging fruit now is we're getting more, like Tommy mentioned, we have more faculty members now writing out learning objectives, and it's really exciting now. We're getting more transparency out there, and then we're asking them to say, well, how am I assessing that? And the low-hanging fruit to me is resolving the difference between employers looking for do stuff, and you have people say do stuff, but they have a multiple choice test. So it's resolving the difference between the learning outcome, is it do or no, and in the form of assessment, we got to have some consistency. And I think the low-hanging fruit is getting people to think through how they write their learning outcome statement, how they assess it. They kind of need to match up a little bit better.
So the next question, and then we're going to open it up. The next question is really, what would you put on your wish list if you had one wish in this area that you could really improve either at your own institution or for the nation or for the globe? What would you put on the list and why? And Tom, I'm going to start with you.
Well, that's a good question. I'm actually living my wish list right now in that we are trying to develop alternative credentials and really say to the Academy that we don't need a single report. One size fits all. This has been, I have to say, I have to tattletale on my own profession, but for 50 years we have been defending this one report, and that's what it is. It was a paper report out of a database. We call it a transcript. It was an enrollment history, and we basically said to the world that this is all you're going to get. And that was the learning record. So the wish list, and what I'm glad that this project came along because it now opens up people's imaginations, and it says, hey, it's okay to think in this alternative way to help the learner then represent their skills.
What's on your wish list, Chris?
Thinking big here. My wish is for the world to be increasingly global and mobile, and for people to be able to live and study and work where they want, and to have those transitions be easy. And records of significant achievement are an critical part of that. And so I've already tipped my hand I'm working on the infrastructure part that will make that kind of verification process possible. But it's really longing for while we need structure and schemas, kind of an understanding that we're all working on one big human project and finding a way for people to do it in the way that's best for them and productive, kind of like a big picture wish.
Okay, good. Steve?
We are at a once-in-a-lifetime moment when it is possible to change the higher educational ecosystem, and we've got to seize that opportunity. We know what works. What we have now is an implementation problem, and it's compounded by the fact that we often do things for our convenience rather than for our students' benefit. For example, we know that an integrated curriculum that's coherent, that the courses are synergistic, works well for students. We know with our new student body that bilingual curricula work really well. Why don't we do it? Well, we could if we wanted to. We know with working students, block scheduling is really effective. Why don't we do it? We don't do it because we'd rather teach at 10 a.m., right? But that's not a reason not to do it. We know that coaching models and peer mentoring models will help bring many more students to success. So let's do it. You know, let's just seize the commercial slogan and just do it.
What's on your wish list, Bob?
It's a short-term list, but it's basically, I'm a workforce labor market analyst, and I've always thought about the problems of transparent markets. Transparent markets from the employer and the supply side. And I guess I was hoping that in the future, all players, job seekers mean students, credentialing organizations of all types, and employers publish information based on the World Wide Web's guidance for open link data and allow application developers to realize the dream of more open, transparent markets that will allow a lot of different players to take independent action based on much better information like we've seen in other markets. So that's kind of my dream.
Sarah?
My dream is that higher ed and secondary education could work seamlessly to create a path for all students to be able to access post-secondary opportunities, for them to be honored for their learning experiences up until that point, to be honored, to be translated easily from their high school transcript to their college transcript, so that we would pick up all of the students. We talked a little bit in my previous session about how students start to disengage with school as soon as they start school. And we just lose more and more and more and more of them. And I think a huge hole is the transition from 12th grade and from high school to secondary education. We all know the literature has confirmed that students need education beyond high school to be successful in the world currently and the world that we're moving into. And we have to work together because higher ed needs these students as well. We have to work together to create systems that talk to each other, to create a smooth transition for students, and to continue to honor students for their learning wherever it occurs, whether it's inside the classroom or outside of it, whether it occurs K-12 or whether it occurs at a college institution, to be able to continue that learning, to validate that learning, and to showcase that learning on transcripts.
And I'm going to share with you I really want more than one, but but one of them is that we would have the equivalent of Travelocity or Expedia around the kind of to get information like we can about hotels and airline flights and rail and rental cars. Why can't we do that for all the different credentials that we have so that students really can plan their futures? We actually think that this is doable if we can identify the different credentials that are out there from all the different providers and build a more transparent system, and then the apps would come. And for a lot of us, like it or not, we're going to live in Google world. And we probably can get there in the next several years, depending on how fast we decide to accelerate this progress. So what I'd like to do is maybe if Chad or someone can just start microphones, and we're going to try to, I don't know if we're going to be able to do it, we'll try to get to every table, and if you want to put out one thing you'd like to see us accelerate in the next year that could move this forward, we'd like to hear from you. We'll try to get as many in as we can, so keep it short. Anybody at that table want to make a suggestion? And he can make another pass through if you're still thinking.
I'll just mention that I really appreciate the support of Lumina to make this vision appear, and I hope over the course of next year they maintain the momentum and help to spread this amongst the schools and use their abilities to promote something that is so important for higher education.
Thank you. We should have a lot of wishes. It's almost Christmas. Or whatever holiday you're celebrating.
I'd like for us to promote some internal conversations at our institution across undergraduate and graduate to get some lift for this. Not only, we talked in our group today, not only for students who might be preparing to go to graduate school, but also considering that most of our institutions are big employers as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I guess I'm up. I think, what would I do? Sorry. I would, or we would actually, accelerate the adoption of standards so that data could transfer seamlessly from one part of the institution to the other in terms of systems. And I think you're seeing good representation on the panel with maybe what might happen externally, but we would love it. Something like the IMS Global work being done, we think that would solve a lot of our issues.
I'll put two things on the list. One would be some basic tenets, if not some firmer frameworks about what a CSR would include or be built upon. The second would be a little bit more solid implementation guidance of how to go about developing one of these for campuses so that we can get scalability of these records.
I would add that over lunch, one of the campuses asked about funds. Well, I'm from Lumina, so that's a logical question. Knowing that it's a big lift to implement the new models, and Lumina tends to fund more network scale-up efforts, not so much individual institutions. But this is a huge problem, and I'm surprised that we haven't heard the financing question come up yet about how do you take these great ideas and a lot of the pilots you develop and really go big. But maybe we're going to hear funding on some of your wish lists.
I would like to see us accelerate using the technology for portability of all different types of credentials so that learners can take their credentials with them and combine them in creative ways.
And not surprisingly, my wish list would include the opportunity to include experiential learning that happens outside of the campus, such as service years or other opportunities like that on the transcript.
For my wish list, I think that we stop trying to solve problems for students and help them solve it with us.
There's one up here. I think there's actually two up here.
So Holly, I'm so glad you mentioned the funding thing, because Kevin and I were talking, I said I think my wish list is a technology solution that all institutions can actually afford, not those that are, well off.
So mine is that the higher education community, the folks that are here, can somehow provide enough modeling so that we don't continue to end up with 150 different types of solutions, and so we can really give guidance to the folks who have not dove into this yet, and some clear models that would make this a little bit more manageable.
Other things on wish list or things that you'd like to put on a list that you'd like to see everyone try to accelerate in the next year or so, year or 2 years? I know a lot of these ideas have come up in some of the other sessions, so when you put all the notes together, we'll have, I think, a long wish list.
I would like to see a continuation of the conversation around how to get the, again, it's the employer side of the equation and how to help employers understand these new kinds of transcripts or these new types of records and use them. And just, again, how can we sort of convene the right folks, whether it's the folks developing the different systems, the screening, the candidate screening, the applicant screening systems on the business side, talking to the folks developing comprehensive student records on the education side, and then also just in general helping the employer community understand and think about student records in a different way.
Everybody talk who wanted to talk?
I have one. So I think in retrospect that a year and change is a very short time for institutions to have done this work to really fully flesh out those models. So I would echo what Kevin was saying, which is I think that what would be most helpful to come out of this is a vetting of models that have clear implications for scaling to other institutions, and what components those might be. And on my particular wish list would be models where the comprehensive student record accommodates both the academic transcript and institutional-wide learning outcomes, as well as the co-curricular, so that we've all talked about putting students at the forefront of what these records would be, making it focused on the learner, and to find some good models that have done that and be able to fund that. It would be great if Lumina could fund a couple of those to full fruition so that we could hold them up as good models and promote their further development and clarity about the principles that I think we've been talking about for the last 2 days. So I think our models, it was good because we were kind of all over the place and they were very different in what we saw. But I think now the next step is to make some qualitative judgments about which we think would be important and which speak to the principles that we've been discussing for the next couple of days. And it would be great for those institutions that are moving forward on this to have some support from Lumina in doing so.
That would look a lot like Google World, where you get X numbers of stars for different, for different models or products. Others? Well, if not, I think we're ready for Amber to come up and join me in thanking the panel for your remarks.
Their comments were super.
Thank you. A few closing thank yous. It almost feels like some kind of speech, so don't start the music on me just yet, because there's a lot of people to thank. First of all, I just want to thank, to your point about the institutions who just really took this on and managed a lot of change and work in a short amount of time. And so thank you for helping us to see what's possible, for helping us dream, so that we could dive deep into some of these broader questions. You're all to be commended for your work, for the consultants that were by your sides, and for NASPA and ACRO. Tremendous job getting us here today. I also want to just thank all the panelists that were a part of this conversation for helping us again to see these questions from a lot of different angles, and that was really helpful. Also to our deep dive session leaders who volunteered to lead you through, again, what are the big issues, what should we do in the next year or so to start to tackle these issues. And then I want to let you know some of the materials that are going to be coming out of this meeting. By tomorrow, we should have all of the plenary session videos posted on the Lumina YouTube channel. They will be captioned, so those will be available. We're talking about how we take all the notes from this and start to issue some reports or one-pagers or particular things. We will probably post those on the Lumina website, but since we have your email address, we'll also make sure you are notified when those things become available. And then ACRO has also volunteered to gather the slides from all the institution presentations yesterday and to post those on the website so you have access to those demonstration materials as well. So those are some materials that are forthcoming. I can tell you that this is not going to be the last time Lumina talks about this issue or continues to convene and talk about what do we do next. And this meeting was extremely informative in helping us, again, start to shape what comes next. And something that I just keep walking away from is that we have to do this together, that we've created great momentum here. And what happens when we don't work together is that we have a disconnected system where gaps exist and learners fall through the cracks. And it's not just one institution or one education provider, it's that we all have to do this together. This is a big lift, that the potential opportunity here to better serve individuals, and I loved it's a human challenge, is that we're trying to enable citizens of our country to have social mobility, and that's, at the end of the day, what I think we can't lose sight of. And so please continue to be in touch with each other, to talk with us at Lumina, and let's keep this work moving, because I think it's really important to our learners. So thank you again for the wonderful meeting.